What happens when the CEO of a successful business is ignored in his own store? Franklin James, the man who signs the checks, was about to find out. Dressed as a regular customer, he sat in silence, watching his employees treat him like he didn't matter. 2 hours later, he had enough, and that was just the beginning. Subscribe now to see how this shocking twist changes everything. Franklin James sat quietly in the waiting area, the faint hum of lo-fi music filling the silence. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the unremarkable scene, a few customers scrolling through their phones, lost in their own worlds, while the receptionist Kelsey sat behind the counter, her eyes glued to her screen. The clock ticked on. 10 minutes, 20, then 40. He shifted in his seat, trying to maintain his calm, but it was growing harder. Was this a joke? He had an appointment booked for 10 a.m. sharp, but here he was, waiting, alone, ignored as if he didn't matter. He cleared his throat softly, hoping for some acknowledgement. "Hi there, I booked a consultation for 10, he said. His voice was warm, polite, the tone of someone used to being taken seriously, but Kelsey didn't even glance up. She simply mumbled, "Name." "Frank," he replied, swallowing a knot in his throat. "Frank Jennings." She tapped a few keys, chewing. Lazily. "Take a seat, someone will get you." Franklin felt a twinge of disbelief. Someone will get me. He glanced at the clock on the wall. 10:15. No one came. 10:30. The minutes dragged on, the weight of the air pressing down on him. He watched as Kelsey, completely absorbed in her phone, laughed at something on the screen. Was this a professional setting or a high school break room? Few customers looked around, exchanging uneasy glances, but no one said a word. He could feel his frustration building, a tight ball of anger and disbelief settling in his chest. He had invested years of his life into growing this company. He had made countless decisions, worked tirelessly, watched his business expand, and now, here he was, being treated like an invisible man in his own business. A stranger left in a corner, completely ignored. Is this how my customers feel? As time stretched on, Franklin's mind raced. He wasn't just angry, he was stunned. The longer he sat there, the more he realized this wasn't just a one-time mistake. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern. A man next to him leaned over, his voice a hushed whisper. "I've been here since 9:40. She's not called anyone in. I think she forgot about us." Franklin nodded, but the words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their truth. Kelsey's complete lack of responsibility, her detachment from her job was no accident. This was how the business ran, cold, uncaring, inefficient. The very things he had worked so hard to build, a reputation for quality service, attention to detail, care for every client, were crumbling in front of his. His hands gripped the armrests, knuckles white. It wasn't just about the waiting anymore. It was about the system, about the failures at the heart of his company, about employees who didn't care, about leadership that wasn't leading. Franklin stood up, his patience now thin, and walked back to the desk. "Excuse me," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's been over 2 hours. Is anyone actually working back there?" Kelsey didn't even look up. She didn't acknowledge him, didn't flinch. She simply sighed, her gum popping loudly as she rolled her eyes. "I told you," she said with a nonchalant wave. "Someone will get you. You don't need to keep asking." Something inside Franklin snapped, the anger that had been simmering beneath the surface now boiled over. He couldn't stand it. He couldn't sit quietly any longer. He couldn't let this continue. He walked out the door, his heart pounding. His thoughts were a blur of frustration and disbelief. How had it come to this? Sitting in his car, staring at the steering wheel, Franklin had a choice to make. He could walk away, go back to the corporate office, and file a complaint. He could talk to the district manager, maybe have a few difficult conversations, but would that fix anything? No. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. He needed to know the truth, the whole truth, and the only way to do that was to go back, not as a customer, but as someone who could see things from the inside. The next morning, Franklin returned. This time, he was no longer Frank Jennings. He was Fred Jenkins, an eager new hire. He walked into the store with buzzed hair, a fake tattoo sleeve, and a fresh disguise. He applied for the front desk position, knowing that this would be the only way to truly understand what was happening. The store manager, Carla, barely glanced at him before sending him to work. It didn't take long before Franklin saw the full scope of the problem. Kelsey wasn't just lazy. She was unchecked, allowed to do whatever she wanted without consequence. She showed up late, flirted with delivery guys, ignored customers, and had no regard for the basic responsibilities of her job. Shayla, on the other hand, was everything Kelsey wasn't: efficient, caring, and responsible. But even Shayla couldn't thrive in this toxic environment. As the day wore on, Franklin watched in disbelief. He saw Kelsey dismiss customers with a flick of her hand, watched her act like nothing mattered. He heard her mock a client to her friend on the phone. That was the final straw. The sense of helplessness Franklin felt was overwhelming. How had this happened? How had his company, built on a foundation of customer service and care, descended into chaos? But it wasn't just about Kelsey. Franklin's growing frustration wasn't just with her. It was with the entire culture of the business. The lack of accountability, the absence of leadership, the apathy that had seeped into every corner of the company. He realized then that his customers weren't just being neglected, they were being disrespected. And so were the employees who actually cared. Franklin knew something had to change. It was time to step up, to confront the real problem, to put an end to this cycle of negligence. But what could he do? The answer was clear. He would have to make a decision, one that would shake the company to its core. This wasn't just about customer service. It was about respect. And Franklin James was done waiting. The next morning, as Franklin sat in his car outside the wellness center, a knot tightened in his stomach. He had barely slept the night before, his mind swirling with thoughts of what had happened and what was about to unfold. He was on the edge of something, he could feel it. But still, the unknown gripped him. What would it mean to go through with this? What would happen if he exposed the issues so openly? But there was no turning back now. He had seen too much, and the weight of his silence had become unbearable. As he prepared to enter the building, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from his sister, Maya, a longtime friend and confidant. She had always been the one to listen when he needed someone to talk to, especially when the weight of the world seemed too much to bear. She worked in HR for a large corporation and had seen her fair share of workplace drama, so Franklin always trusted her judgment. "Are you sure about this?" her message read. "Going undercover in your own company is bold. It's a lot to handle, especially with what's been happening lately. Don't let this turn into a personal vendetta. You've worked so hard to build this." Franklin read the message twice, letting her words sink in. Maya was right. He had worked tirelessly to build his company, to make it a place where people could thrive. But what good was it if the very foundation of his business was eroding from within? The longer he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't about a personal vendetta. It was about accountability. It was about doing what was right, not just for the business, but for the people who had been working hard every day, silently enduring the mess that had been allowed to fester. He texted back quickly, "I know, Maya, but I'm done letting it slide. People like Kelsey, like Carla, they need to be held accountable. I can't keep ignoring what I've seen. I'll fix this one way or another." He put the phone away, took a deep breath, and walked into the wellness center as Fred Jenkins, a name he had chosen to further mask his identity. As he entered, the familiar soft music and the smell of essential oils greeted him. But nothing felt the same. Not anymore. He walked up to the front desk where Kelsey sat, her head tilted downward, her eyes fixed on her phone. She didn't even look up as he approached. He cleared his throat and she barely acknowledged him with a glance, her gum popping as she chewed lazily. Franklin's pulse quickened, but he pushed the feeling down. He was here to observe, not to act on impulse. "Hi, I'm Fred Jenkins. I'm here to start my training for the front desk position." Kelsey looked him up and down, uninterested, before mumbling, "Yeah, okay," as she gestured toward the back. "Go to the break room. Carla will be there." Gritting his teeth, Franklin made his way to the break room, trying to hold his composure. As he walked through the hall, he passed Shayla, who was wiping down some counters in the hallway. She glanced at him with a slight nod, and then returned to her work. But Franklin noticed something different in her eyes, an awareness that he had never seen before. Shayla was someone who knew the truth, but she was too smart to show it to just anyone. He wanted to speak to her, but he held back. He needed to see what would happen first. Inside the break room, Carla, the store manager, was sitting at a small table scrolling through her tablet. She barely glanced up when Franklin walked in. "You're late," Carla said dryly, her voice sharp. "We start on time here, okay?" Franklin stood frozen for a second, surprised at the lack of professionalism, but then he shook it off. He needed to stay in character. "Sorry, I just got in. I'm ready to start." Carla didn't respond. She simply gestured to a stack of paperwork on the table. "Fill out the forms. I'll be back in a minute," she said before walking out of the room, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. Franklin couldn't help but notice how absent Carla was. She was barely involved with the team, and yet she carried the title of manager. It was as if she was playing a role rather than leading. The tension between her indifference and the growing chaos around her was palpable. Franklin began to understand how much damage this lack of leadership was causing. As the day went on, Franklin observed the disarray behind the scenes. Kelsey continued to ignore customers, spending most of her time on her phone or chatting with delivery people. She didn't make eye contact with anyone unless absolutely necessary. Franklin had seen enough. During lunch, he overheard Kelsey speaking to Shayla, a conversation that sent a chill down his spine. "You know," Kelsey said, her tone flippant, "that old dude yesterday, the one who waited for hours? Like, why's he throwing a fit? It's not like we're a hospital. People need to calm down." Shayla didn't respond right away, but Franklin could see the flicker of something in her eyes. She wasn't saying anything, but the look on her face was enough to tell him what she thought. She knew Kelsey was wrong. She had to. But she kept quiet, because that was the only option for someone like her. Franklin's heart pounded in his chest as he watched this exchange unfold. This wasn't just about poor service anymore. This was about disrespect. It was about people being treated like they didn't matter. Employees, customers, everyone. But what could he do? He couldn't just walk away. He had already made up his mind. He couldn't stand idly by and let this company fall apart at the seams, just because certain people were too lazy or too indifferent to do their jobs. Later that day, when he saw Shayla diligently working behind the desk, helping frustrated clients, Franklin made a decision. She was the kind of employee who cared, the kind who put in the effort without complaining, and she was the one who would change things, whether she realized it or not. But for now, he needed to keep observing. He needed to see just how deep this problem ran. As the day ended, Franklin walked back to his car, heart heavy with everything he had witnessed. But as he started the engine, he knew that this wasn't over. The change he needed to make was coming, and it would come from within. He was going to clean house, starting with the very people who had let this chaos fester. Maya was right. This was no longer about just complaints or reports. It was about respect, for both employees and customers. And Franklin James was ready to fix it. No more excuses. The following day, Franklin stood outside the wellness center, his mind racing. He had seen enough. The behavior he had witnessed in the past 2 days, the blatant disregard for customers, the laziness of Kelsey, the absence of leadership from Carla, it all weighed heavily on him. He was no longer just a businessman. He was a man who had made a decision that would change the course of everything. He didn't know what to expect when he walked back in, but he was determined. This couldn't continue. There had to be accountability. Not just for Kelsey, but for everyone. Carla had failed to recognize the signs of a toxic culture. Kelsey was a product of that negligence. The business was unraveling, and Franklin was the only one who could fix it. He took a deep breath, glanced at his phone one last time to check the time, and walked into the store with purpose. He had come prepared. Today wouldn't just be another day of observing from the sidelines. Today he would act. Today he would reveal himself as the CEO. The moment he walked in, the smell of essential oils and the soft hum of ambient music seemed to intensify. Everything felt amplified. Each step he took toward the front desk felt heavier than the last. He could see Kelsey behind the counter, looking even more indifferent than before. But today, Franklin wasn't here as Fred Jenkins, the trainee. He was here as Franklin James, the CEO. Kelsey didn't even look up when he approached. She was on her phone, scrolling through Instagram, oblivious to the world around her. Franklin stood there for a moment, allowing the tension to settle in. He had spent enough time observing, enough time holding back his frustration. This was the moment for action. He cleared his throat, trying to remain calm. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice steady but with an underlying firmness that couldn't be ignored. "I'm Franklin James, CEO of this company. We need to talk." Kelsey didn't respond right away, but when she finally looked up, the surprise in her eyes was evident. She opened her mouth to say something, but Franklin held up his hand to stop her. "I've seen what's been going on here. The way you treat customers, the way you treat your coworkers, this cannot continue. This is your last chance. Change. Now, or you'll be gone, understand?" Kelsey stared at him, blinking in disbelief. "Wait a second, you're the CEO?" Her voice dripped with skepticism, but Franklin didn't let her deflect. "Yes, I am. And let me make one thing clear. I will not tolerate this kind of behavior in my company. This is not just about customer service, this is about respect. Respect for the customers. Respect for the people who work here. And you've lost that respect from me. You've lost it from everyone." Franklin's words hit her hard. Kelsey didn't flinch, but her discomfort was palpable. She opened her mouth as if to argue, but nothing came out. The reality of the situation was settling in. Franklin wasn't just some faceless manager in the background. He was the man who owned this place, the one who called the shots, and he was done allowing her to undermine the business. As he stood there, he couldn't help but notice how eerily quiet the store had become. The usual hum of lo-fi music, the faint chatter of customers, it all seemed distant, muffled. Everyone was waiting for something to happen. Would Franklin fire Kelsey? Would the team stand behind him? The tension in the air was thick, but Franklin didn't back down. He knew that this moment would define the future of his company. "You're fired, Kelsey." The words left his mouth almost effortlessly, but Franklin could feel the gravity of the decision. He had given her the chance. She had failed, and there was no place for someone like her in his company. Not anymore. Kelsey opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her face flushed red, a mix of anger and humiliation, but Franklin didn't wait for her to process what had just happened. He turned toward Shayla, who had been quietly observing the exchange from the side. The woman had been a silent witness to the dysfunction in the store. Now it was time for Shayla to take charge. "Shayla," Franklin said firmly, his gaze never wavering, "you're the new assistant manager, effective immediately." Shayla blinked, stunned. She had always been the worker in the background, doing the tasks that no one wanted to do. But she was so much more than that. She had been the steady presence, the one who had kept the store running despite the chaos that surrounded her. Franklin knew that she was the one who deserved this promotion, not someone who had shown such blatant disrespect for the job. "But I don't know what to say." Shayla's voice was shaky, but there was a sense of reluctance in her eyes. She had always worked hard, never asking for recognition. But now Franklin was offering her an opportunity she hadn't dreamed of. "You don't need to say anything," Franklin replied, his voice warm but serious. "Just do what you've been doing. Lead this store the way it should be led. With respect, with integrity, you've earned it." As Shayla processed the news, Franklin turned to the rest of the staff, his eyes scanning each of them. There were some nervous glances, some unsure expressions, but Franklin wasn't looking for them to be perfect. He was looking for change. He needed to know that they all understood what had just happened. "Let me be clear," Franklin said, his voice carrying through the room. "This is about respect. If you're not here to treat our customers well, if you're not here to show up every day and do your best, then you're not welcome. From this moment forward, we will build a company where everyone feels valued, employees and customers alike." As he spoke, he could feel the tension slowly dissipate, replaced by a sense of purpose. The room was shifting. The staff, the very same ones who had seen so much dysfunction, now had the opportunity to be part of something better. They had been waiting for someone to lead them, and Franklin had finally stepped up. He turned back to Shayla, who was still processing the sudden, "Are you ready?" he asked, his tone gentle but firm. She nodded slowly, her eyes filled with determination. "I am." And with that, Franklin knew he had made the right choice. Today wasn't just about firing Kelsey or promoting Shayla. It was about making a stand. It was about saying, loud and clear, that the status quo would no longer be tolerated. The future of the wellness center was about to change, but this time, it would change for the better. The room had fallen quiet again, but the silence was different now. It wasn't filled with tension. It was filled with the possibility of a new beginning. Franklin turned to leave, his heart pounding, but this time, it was with a sense of accomplishment. He had made the hard choice, and now the real work would begin. He wasn't just going to change his company. He was going to change how it was run from the inside out. As the door closed behind him, Franklin felt the weight of the last few weeks lifting from his shoulders. There was still much to do, but for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful about the future. The weeks that followed Franklin's decision to fire Kelsey and promote Shayla were filled with changes, some subtle, others more immediate. The wellness center, which had once been filled with frustration and tension, was now beginning to find its rhythm. Shayla stepped into her new role as assistant manager with the quiet confidence that Franklin had seen in her from the beginning. She wasn't perfect, but she didn't need to be. She brought something more important: respect for both the customers and the staff. Franklin had made his intentions clear from the start. He wasn't here to fix the business for the short term. He was here to rebuild a company that was rooted in respect. For the first time in a long while, the employees felt heard. No one was being overlooked. No one was being treated like they didn't matter. Everyone from Shayla to the part-time employees knew their worth. The day-to-day operations improved almost immediately. Customers began to notice the change. The waiting times were shorter, the reception desk wasn't a place of chaos anymore, and most importantly, clients were greeted with the respect they deserved. Franklin didn't just make sure the employees were doing their jobs. He took the time to listen to their feedback, asking what they needed to do their jobs better, how they could improve as a team. His hands-on approach was a stark contrast to the previous leadership, where the focus had been on image management rather than customer and employee satisfaction. A month later, Franklin called another staff meeting, but this time, it wasn't to reprimand anyone. It was to celebrate progress. The team had transformed, and Franklin wanted to acknowledge their hard work. He stood in front of them, a genuine smile on his face. "You've all done an incredible job," Franklin began, his voice strong and full of pride. "This place is finally running the way it should be. The respect I see here, the teamwork, it's a reflection of all the hard work you've put in. And I know it hasn't been easy, but we're in this together. No one is going unnoticed now." He turned to Shayla, his voice softer now. "And Shayla, you've done more than just take over the front desk. You've become the leader this place needed. You've earned this, and it's only the beginning. Keep leading with your heart." Shayla's eyes softened. She had always been the behind-the-scenes worker, the one who took care of the messes others ignored. She wasn't used to public praise, but she deserved it. The respect that Franklin had shown her, the belief in her potential, had made all the difference. With the meeting wrapping up, Franklin turned to the group one last time. "I've seen the way you've grown, the way you've come together. This is the new standard. This is how we do business from now on. Everyone is part of this team and every one of you has value. If I've learned anything, it's that a company is only as strong as the people who make it up. And now, we're stronger than we've ever been. The applause was brief, but heartfelt. Franklin watched the team, his team, smiling and exchanging glances. It wasn't about him anymore. It was about them, the ones who had stood by the company, even when it wasn't easy. He realized that the true success of his business wasn't in its profit margins or expansion plans. It was in the people who worked for him, the ones who took ownership of their roles and cared about the outcome. Franklin knew that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. He had learned some hard truths about his business and about himself. When you get too caught up in the numbers, the success, and the outward appearance of your business, you forget to care about the details that matter. He had been guilty of that, of focusing too much on the big picture and neglecting the small, human moments that truly define a company's culture. That night, Franklin stayed late, like he used to when the business was just starting out. He went over reports and worked on plans for the future, but now he did so with a new perspective. He didn't want to just grow the company. He wanted to create something sustainable, a place where employees felt respected, where customers were treated with care, and where everyone felt like they were a part of something bigger than just a paycheck. As he left the wellness center, Franklin stopped for a moment at the front door, his hand resting on the handle. He thought about the long road it had taken to get here. He thought about the mistakes, the missed opportunities, and the frustration he had felt. But most of all, he thought about the people who had stood by him, even when things seemed bleak. Shayla, the employees who worked silently behind the scenes, the customers who believed in the company, even when it had let them down. Franklin walked out into the night, the cool air brushing against his face, but there was no bitterness in him anymore. Only a sense of peace. The work wasn't done, there was still much to do, but for the first time in a long time he felt that the company was on the right path. The right people were in place, and the right values were driving the mission. The door clicked behind him. Franklin knew he had changed his business for the better. He wasn't just a CEO. He was a leader, and that was something he had to earn every single day. The wellness center was better now, not perfect, but better. And in that better place, Franklin found something he had almost lost along the way, the human connection, the thing that made everything else worthwhile, and with that, the future felt brighter. The story wasn't finished. It was only just beginning.